Good evening, participants. Welcome back to lecture number 9 of this 10 days lecture series. Today we have Dr. Vibha Bhoot with us. She works as an assistant professor in JNV, that is Narayan Vyas University, Jodhpur. She is a determined individual with a belief that education is the only way to succeed in life. Dr. Vibha is a writer, an active researcher, and a dedicated academician. She has more than 67 research papers published in national, international conferences and various referred national and international journals. She has delivered many lectures in several conferences and faculty development programs, and she has been enriching the students since 18 years with her knowledge and charisma. Recently, she has received the Best Researcher Award of 2021 by Cape Comorin Club. She has been an active Rotarian since the last 10 years, and she believes that the road to salvation goes through social service. At present, she is mentoring 5 research students for their doctoral degree. Her areas of interest are British literature, African American feminism, Indian feminism, diaspora, partition literature, critical theories in literature, and women in war literature. She is one of the board of editors in the journal Jodhpur Studies in English, published by the Department of English, Narayan Vyas University, Jodhpur. Dr. Vibha Bhoot, ma'am, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to have you. Thank you for accepting our invitation and taking on this topic, very pertinent topic, that is naturalism. An overview that you will be sharing with us. We are really honored and happy for our invitation being accepted by you. And we welcome you wholeheartedly, ma'am. And I'm sure we are here for a very engaging session, ma'am. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for this beautiful introduction. I'd like to start right away because I'm already late. So I'm sharing my screen. And the topic of my presentation today is naturalism and overview. Now, to all out there, it's a warm hello from my side. And here I go. Now, naturalism is a philosophical doctrine. It's opposed to idealism, is concerned with natural self and real self. It contends that ultimate reality is matter and not mind or spirit. Naturalism doesn't believe in spiritualism. It denies the existence of spiritual universe, the universe of ideas and values. So it denies all that. According to naturalism, the material world is only the real world. It is the only reality. This material world is being governed by a system of natural laws and the man, who is the creation of the material world, and he must submit to all what's happening around him. The naturalists have regard for actual facts, actual situations, and realities. For them, nature is everything. It is the whole reality. Now, behind everything, there's nature. It denies the existence of anything beyond nature. Naturalism believes that everything comes from nature and returns to nature. Nature, according to naturalism, is a self-sufficient entity. It is self-determined and governed by its own laws. Now, naturalists see the things as they are. And to begin with, I'd just like to draw an outline for my lecture, and after that I'll proceed. So why I'm taking this in between, the definition of naturalism has already been covered. So the structure of my presentation goes like this. I'll be discussing some age-specific comparisons, then influence of culture, then naturalism and determinism. How does both affect each other? Some major tenets of naturalism. Naturalism as a literary movement would follow after that. And why did naturalism start? What was the reason for this movement to come into existence? Then types of naturalism, writers and their works as an example. And then finally, a touch of feminism, which is I'm a student of feminism. That is why the feministic naturalism would come over. So dear all, may we proceed now? Now, naturalism realism and naturalism came as a reaction against romanticism. The imagination, the poetry, the prose, etc. Whatever was being constructed, whatever was being produced under the movement, romantic movement, naturalism and realism came as a reaction against romanticism. So now the father of naturalism is Emile Zola, a French writer, and the movement emerged in 1890s. Now, three revolutions took place during that time, during the late 19th century. The first one was the Industrial Revolution, and the steam machines and everything was, you can say, discovered and made and all that stuff. Scientific revolution came over, in which railways, electric bulbs, and all the things were discovered. And the next was moral revolution. Moral revolution is the end of the hypocrisy and the morality of the Victorian times. And that is why this movement came over as a reaction against existing romanticism and the beliefs and faiths, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. So now, according to naturalists, there is inherent goodness in man, as well as the bad side of man exists, and there is an innate capacity in human beings for morality. Man is born rational. The naturalist does have idealized man. Nature, according to naturalists, is laws. It does not therefore require us to have insight or intuitions to understand nature. Now, coming on to this comparison on this particular slide. Now, while romanticism seeks reality in transcendental ideas or absolute idealism, naturalism seeks its reality in the mundane. Romanticism speaks of hope, comfort, from trials through several ways. When Shelley speaks in Ode to the West Wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? So we have hope, we have a vision of the world which is not there, but it may come in future. Or when Keats says in Ode to Nightingale that he wants to escape into Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. So there is an idealized situation to take you away from the trials and tribulations of the world. Or when Keats says, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple slained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, unquote. So these beautiful lines take us just to a world of, we kind of migrate from the current situation or the current existence to a world where the purple colored wine and the bubbles winking at the brim would just entice us, would just mesmerize us and take us away. It's a kind of an escapism from the ground realities. So romanticism was a kind of an escapism from the realities and trials of life. Now, they talk of an escapism in several ways, away from the trials and tribulations, into the world of fantasy, probably into a world of comfort that will give them solace and peace. Now, when we talk about realism, realism is used by literary critics in opposition to the romantic world or romanticism. While romantic or heroic than actual realism presents an imitation to life. To achieve this effect, an author prefers the protagonist as an ordinary citizen and prefers the average, commonplace, and everyday scenes. Daniel Defoe, the first novelist, realist in the early 18th century, dealt with the adventures of a shipwrecked mariner named Robinson Crusoe, along with the extraordinary misadventures of Moll Flanders. In broad sense of the term, Henry Fielding, Jane Austen, George Eliot, and Tolstoy are realists. And speaking about naturalism, naturalism in sometimes claim to be an even more accurate picture of life than realism. But naturalism is not only like realism, a special selection of subject matter and a special literary manner. It is a mode of fiction that was developed by a school of writers in accordance with a particularly philosophical thesis. This thesis is a product of Darwinian biology in the mid 19th century. Now, when Darwin wrote about the origin of man in the Origin of Species in his book, it came as a big jolt to the moral belief system that was existing in that existed in the Victorian times. So the faith in God, it went upside down, and everything was confusing in Victorian times. So now aspects of naturalistic selections and management of materials and its austere or harsh frankness of manner are apparent in many modern novels and dramas. Now, various plays by Eugene O'Neill, Norman Mailer's novel Kid and the Dead, Theodore Dreiser's An American Tragedy. Now, the movement actually hit the existing movements and came as a full-fledged approach towards the novels, towards the writings, towards the drama, as well as the prose. So these are a couple of differences that I wanted to talk about, and some more differences to be going on to the precise level, as in what is the difference between naturalism and realism, which is a most confusing thing to for even the biggest of the critics who exist. They have a difficulty in judging that what belongs to naturalism and what belongs to realism. Now, the natural laws under naturalism and the forces operate in the universe are the book is judged, or the book is criticized according to the particular natural laws and forces operate in the universe, whether these aspects are working on it or not. And all the knowledge of the universe falls within the zone of scientific investigation. The characters are controlled by the environment and fight for survival. Now, how that instinctual fight for survival is strong and sturdy, and whosoever, and then the winner would be the fittest person for the survival fight. Now, the naturalism thing rejects idealized experiences. There's this objective study of human beings, and a belief that the person is governed by his or her passions and is subordinate to the social environment. So the passions dominate under naturalism. And for the realism thing, they present an accurate, detailed, unembellished depiction, imaginative idealization. So mundane, everyday experiences, familiar people, places, stories, primarily middle and lower class society is depicted. The ultimate reality is the reality of the physical objects. And to add on to this particular aspect of realism, Henrik Ibsen was considered to be the father of realism, a Norwegian playwright of 19th century. So these were the most, you can say, intricate of the comparisons between the realism and naturalism. Now, realism, when the author speaks about the normal average life in an accurate, truthful way. Naturalism is a manner and method of composition by which the author portrays life as it is, the harsh realities of life. And it is again portrayed with the philosophical theory of determinism. Now man is one target. The calamity may, or the disaster may befall upon him through any source, through any medium, through anything, any natural thing, and he has to bear, and the person who is the fittest would survive it all. So now, now let us talk about the influence of culture which led to naturalism. Now, how did the culture influence development of naturalism? Now, when Darwin came up with his Origin of Species, in the Origins last paragraph, Darwin says on the page number 490, he says that in the beginning, I quote, life was breathed into a few forms or into one. He said that the one who is his survival of the fittest term, like the meant that whosoever is more adaptable to the change, whosoever is more perceptible to the change that are happening around him would be surviving till the end. Now, Herbert Spencer, in the Principle of Biology in 1864, coined the expression the survival of the fittest. So actually it means that the mechanism of the natural selection, the person who would be a winner or who would be surviving in the end would be a person who will be selected by nature. So he'll be the fittest person, though misleading yet, I understand. It's used in an adaptive context of Darwin. So the next point that comes on the screen is how naturalism and Marxism go in accordance with each other. So now these critics were affecting the culture and the economy, and everything. So that is why I have included these points in my presentation. Now, Karl Marx in the Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte says, I quote, "Men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under the circumstances they have chosen, but under circumstances directly encountered or given and transmitted from the past." Now, Marx says that whatever has been inherited from the past, the circumstances are molded according to the past, and the person is expected to encounter those circumstances. Now, he had more or less coherent and organized system of beliefs as to the nature of reality and the nature of man. The new materialism is actually naturalism, rediscovered and extended to and spiritual existence, and to account for social and historical phenomena. Now, Marx kind of provides a wider definition to naturalism in the context of capitalistic economy. Coming to the third point, Sigmund Freud in 1930, in most radical book, The Introduction to Psychoanalysis, argued that human beings are completely controlled by their unconscious mind. They are controlled by three sections of their unconscious mind: id, ego, and superego. Though psychoanalytic criticism covers this id, ego, and superego, I'm not going to that level because I presume that everybody might be knowing, being the student of literature. So I'm just moving ahead with the description as it comes my way. Now, Freud's idea that, I quote, "We are not who we think we are," unquote, and that the majority of what creates our identity lies under our conscious awareness, was extremely radical and influential. He believed that most of what drives us is buried in our subconscious brain. So now the subconscious brain that's working is an accumulation of experiences, and what all we have come across. So the behavior, the response of a person to a particular situation depends upon what is being stored in the subconscious mind of a person. So Freud's the theory of psychoanalysis is also valid over here. And I move on to describe naturalism and determinism in one context. So determinism in philosophy says that all events, include moral choices, are completely Freud says that previously existing feelings, experiences, when they go and get settled in the subconscious mind, even determinism is speaking about the same thing, but in a couple of in a different manner. So the universe is utterly rational, because the knowledge of any given situation assures that unerring knowledge of its future is also possible. Pierre Simon and Marquis de Laplace in 18th century framed this classic formulation. Now, for them, the present state of the universe is the effect of its previous state and the cause of this state follows. Now, whatever was existing previously, now we are experiencing, now we are a product of whatever we have imbibed from our past. If a mind at any given moment could know all of the forces operating in nature and the respective positions of all of its components, it would thereby know with certainty the future and past of every entity, large or small. The Persian poet Omar Khayyam and well, I'd like to connect this idea to the theory of karma as well. Now, Professor Guangjing says that the theory of karma holds valid in determinism. Is determinism related to concept of karma of our Indian philosophy? Now, this renowned professor speaks about this in his article. Is the concept of karma a determinism? He states that, I quote, the concept of karma embraces equally past and present intentional actions. Karma is an accumulation of causes which brings about effects. Now, unquote. So, Professor Guangjing has related the theory of karma to determinism. In fact, it is determinism, actually. Now, determinism focuses entirely on prior causes and conditions, both in physical and mental spheres. Therefore, one could say that karma implies predictability, but not determinism per se. Further, he goes on to create an analogy in his pithy sentence, and here it's on the screen. For karma to be deterministic, determinism holds true. So there is a connection between the past and the present, because as so many of us know that the karma comes back to you and it gives you what you have given already to the universe. And even Omar Khayyam expressed a similar deterministic view in the world in concluding half of his quatrains. And the first morning of the creation wrote what last dawn of reckoning shall read. So these were on the lighter side of it. I came across a couple of haiku, and this is a 3-line poem, shortest possible. So these sounded great to me, and I just incorporated them. It's a Japanese poetical expression, and it's a 5-syllable. So the first line has something that was interesting to me. I just wanted to share with you all. So I'll proceed now. Now, let us come on to what naturalism looks like. Now, it is an emphasis on the routine conversation, the colloquial form of conversation. And it doesn't, you can say, employ any kind of bigger device for expression. And the routine mundane things, no ghost spirits or gods intervening human actions, so no supernatural elements altogether. The subjects are contemporary and reasonable, there is nothing exotic, fantastic locales, or I mean, there's nothing exotic, but there are fantastic locales, and nothing historic or mythic. So no allusions and no references either. Maybe there can be an eventual, like some related to something, some practical events or something, but otherwise, normally the references do not exist. It is a rejection of romanticism, as I said earlier, and it is an embracing of determinism. Now, let's come to the literary side of naturalism. The naturalistic writers were influenced by the theory of evolution by Darwin, Origin of Species, and the characteristics of naturalism in literature made the novel bigger and better because there was detailing, lots of detailing that came over. There was a narrative detachment, and the writer probably did not connect with the text and or maybe the harsher realities of life. Determinism, the people cannot control they have no control over their fate. And the pessimism went around, and the glass was always half empty. So the social environment was unpredictable, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and Narayan, were both very much in love with each other. So the story was very much about love, and the 2 main characters, Jodhpur and was always discussed, heredity and human nature. After this Darwinism, even it influenced Marx and Nietzsche. The vision of Superman came over. Now, coming to Auguste Comte's positivism, I'd like to elaborate on this point because this is somewhat theoretical. So, when we talk about Comte's positivism, it is a philosophical theory which says that genuine knowledge is derived from experience of natural phenomena and their properties and relations. Thus, the information derived from sensory experiences, or as interpreted through reason and logic, forms the exclusive source of certain knowledge. Positivism therefore holds that all general knowledge is a priori knowledge. Now, it holds that society is like the physical world that operates according to general laws. Introspective and intuitive knowledge is rejected, as in naturalism. Metaphysics and theology are again rejected because metaphysics, again, it's a presentation of something, some idea through some images. So that is why metaphysics and theology are rejected, because both cannot be verified by sense experience. Auguste Comte argued that physical world operates according to gravity and other absolute laws. So does society. So he also joined in with the in accordance with the mainstream of naturalism. So I proceed now. Why did this naturalism thing come over? Because there was rapid industrialization in America, end of agrarian myth of pastoral America. Now, closing of the frontier in 1890, and as I spoke about it earlier, that naturalism in Europe and in America, that there were different reasons for the advent of naturalism in both the regions. Now, in the increasing pessimism of Victorian era, fueled by moral crisis and Darwinism, made naturalism a strong influence on major writers like Hardy, Tests of D'Urbervilles, if you remember, in 1891, Jude the Obscure, and Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, and Lord Jim in 1900. Emile Zola was, as I spoke about it earlier, that he had a positivist ideology and a true aesthetic innovativeness and a symbolic approach. That is why he was the father of this particular movement. Now, when we talk about the Great Depression that followed in 1929, the Wall Street crash and the ruined international trade, the putting millions out of it put millions out of work and jobs, and it saw a resurgence of naturalism. And in America, it lasted until the Second World War. So how did in this particular slide, I'm trying to show that what was the perception of different American authors and how did they perceive an individual when they wrote books or when they wrote the novels about. So Ralph Emerson and Nathaniel Hawthorne, they perceived the individual as God, because the genre that was used was romantic. Then naturalist genre, in the naturalist genre, the particular writers were Stephen Crane and Frank, upcoming slides. Now, they viewed the person as a helpless object, whereas a realist like Henry James, Mark Twain, they perceived the individual as a person with some ability, some talent, and some recognition. But for naturalists, a person was a helpless object, you can say a target for any kind of calamity or happening. Now, these are the types of naturalism that I would like to talk about. Physical naturalism. It studies the process of matter of eternal world. It explains human activities in the terms of natural laws and material objects. It emphasizes on physical science. Mechanical naturalism, it stresses on the modern psychology, that is behaviorism, conditional responses, and principle of learning by doing. Mental activity is required to study mechanical naturalism. No spiritual power is required to run this machine as per idealism. This machine comes to move by external stimuli. This machine is the human body or the human mind and the forces of nature. Speaking about biological naturalism, it is based on Darwin's theory of evolution. Man has evolved from lower animal by a gradual process of development to present man. Man is the supreme product of evolution. It is based on three principles: adaptation to the environment, struggle for existence, and survival of the fittest. So that's all about biological naturalism. These are a couple of texts that some of these I'll be speaking about in my upcoming slides. And some renowned writers, Jack London, Eugene O'Neill, and in the main naturalism theater. So I'll be taking up the examples of different naturalistic texts from now on, from this slide onwards. So the first example that I have taken is Stephen Crane's Maggie, a girl of streets. Now, this novel, in this particular novel, there's hereditary determinism, and the lead protagonist Maggie, it leads to her fatal destiny, and the environment dominates in the entire book. In this novel, Crane criticizes the romantic view of life through Maggie and indirectly praises Darwinism. The concept of survival of the fittest from the very beginning of the novel is right from the exposition thing. The readers are exposed to bad conditions. Maggie suffers from all those bad conditions. She lives in the impoverished district of Bowery in Manhattan and is a daughter of an aggressive alcoholic parents and sibling, Jimmy. As the story opens, Jimmy is depicted fighting viciously with a group of boys from the opposing neighborhood. However, with the process of time, the readers expect changes in Jimmy's personality into better. Rather, he turns to be worse and more vicious than before. On the other hand, Maggie is depicted to be innocent and naive, as remarked by the writer. Though Maggie and her brother Jimmy are both captured in the conventions of their environment, they represent contrast in one fundamental respect. Whereas Maggie is presented as inherently good, Jimmy is described as inherently evil. Thus, Maggie's inherently good behavior and her innocence leads her to her surroundings, but the great expense she gives in turn is her life. Now, the first quote I like to elaborate. Against all odds, when Maggie is trying to adapt to the situations, she is going through poverty, hunger, neglect, and abuse. She grows up to be pretty, a miracle in the tenements. When she was a child playing in the street, I quote, dirt disguised her, unquote, and no one noticed her. As a young woman, she transcends her surroundings as if, I quote, the dirt of Rum Alley, unquote, does not stick to her. The phrase about the dirt of Rum Alley is not being in her veins means Maggie is also above the violence, criminality, and immorality of the slums. Her inner goodness is reflected in her outer good looks. This purity is untouched by Rum Alley, and she is able to grow independent of its influence, like the influence of the slums. The second quote that I have picked from the book is, when there's this old woman who's been speaking about the entire thing, the old woman eagerly tells Jimmy and about Maggie's transgressions using the following hints. She came home very late. She was crying, she was begging Pete to reassure her he loved her, and he was already sick of repeating himself. The connotation is Pete and Maggie had sex, probably after Pete told it would be all right because he loved her. Possibly flooded with regret, guilt, and shame, Maggie begs Pete to profess his feelings in hope she will make on commitment. So that's the guilt that's dominating this innocent girl after having sex with Pete, and she wants a kind of an assurance from him that he will be there for her always. Where can I go? This is the most emphatic of the statements that I could learn from the book. So actually, this is the I think the central idea or the central theme uh, that's that's contained in this particular sentence. Now it seems as if it's a simple question. I'm sorry, but the ramifications are enormous and even fatal for Maggie. After being rejected by mother and Jimmy, the last hope for homeless Maggie to stay off in the streets is an appeal to the man who just abandoned her to make good on whatever promises he made in the heat of passion. Readers already have an example here that how she is begging for love, but ultimately she's dejected, she's neglected. Now, we know that what to expect from Jimmy because he is inherently proud and haughty. So he says that you should go out of the house. Pete responds exactly the same way as we expect, even telling Maggie to go to hell. Maggie has no friends, and her attempt to approach a religious looking man for help is rebuffed as well. With nowhere to turn, Maggie wonders what lies in her store. So she's got no directions, nothing. So that's why she says, where can I go? Where will I go? That poor girl who has been neglected, dejected, and left by everyone, even the family members. Now, the information, well, Mag's dead. Now, Jimmy gives this information to the mother. Jimmy tells the mother of Maggie's death in a matter of fact and without any kind of emotional upheavals that he could have felt on the demise of his sister. Jimmy is a product of the cruel environment, so even the death of his sister that does not phase him. Maggie's death is simply a fact, and if a cause would be identified, it would be her immorality, actually. Now, the last statement that was very touching over here. After the death of Maggie, the mother screams that, "Oh yes, I'll forgive her. Oh yes, I'll forgive her." The mother forgives Maggie too late after she's dead. Now, forgiveness could have saved her. Miss Smith's church mission could have saved her. When she was alive, Maggie was a reminder of human frailty and moral failings. She brought up shame upon the household as per her mother and a brother. So only after death, Maggie can be forgiven when her presence, her actions no longer reflect onto the mother. Miss Smith helps the mother, still an upstanding member of the community despite her drinking and swearing. She finds peace. So the depravity of her daughter does not drag her down. Actually, it's a sarcastic comment. Naturalism emphasized, you can say, biological or sociological determinism and viewed the behavior of people as being conditioned by outside forces and which is like beyond their control as well. This is a kind of naturalistic manifesto as projected in the book, in the description of Jimmy's development uh, near the beginning of the chapter 4. The naturalistic prides himself on facing this unpalatable truth. There were two types of literary naturalistic. One is the survival model for human behavior, the other oriented towards the social forces model for human behavior. Now, here Crane was mainly of the latter type, but this passage shows that he had a room for the former as well. The economic and social force at work cannot be resisted. Maggie is doomed because she has no free will. Her fate is determined, solely determined by overwhelming forces beyond her control. This is the social forces model of naturalism appearing in Crane's story. Now, no amount of struggle on her part could have prevailed against the evil world that surrounded her, because that same world had rendered her incapable of knowing what is it she should be struggling against. The girl Maggie blossomed in the mud puddle. None of the dirt of Rum Alley seemed to be in her veins. Now, this was the the quote that I put on the screen. Now, but soon, actually, that dirt gets into her veins. The economic and the social forces that work against her, they couldn't be resisted. Maggie was doomed because she did not have a free will. Now her fate is determined, and everything was like, you can say, beyond her control. So that is why she had to face this particular side by giving her life away. Now, one of the social forces that ruins Maggie caused her to be infatuated with Pete. She is a creature of rum alley, and therefore has no opportunity to acquire any sophistication about the world. I quote, to her, the earth was composed of insults and hardships. She felt instant admiration for man, for a man who openly defied it, unquote. She is too parochial to see Pete for the destructive low life that he really is. This is a part of a very deterministic view of life in the world. The naturalist sees a Maggie as being without a chance in life. No amount of struggle on her part can prevail against the evil world that surrounds her, because that same world has rendered, again, whatever the circumstances surround her. Moreover, Maggie's inability to adjust and adopt herself with the cruel environment is another reason which leads to her downfall. Now, she had no adaptability, Darwinism. So, despite the fact of being inherently good, in contrast to her other characters, Maggie fails to deal and tackle the issues she faces. Now, whatever comes her way, she becomes the center point, or you can say the circumstances revolve around her, and she had to give in. Maggie desperately seeks refuge in her mother's tenement, only to be rejected under derisive laughter. Maggie's turning to a prostitute after being rejected by her hypocritical mother and brother explains how inescapable forces in her environment and her surroundings in the last scene. Similarly, Crane in this novel depicts the type of violence essentially caused by human beings to human beings. For instance, the novel opens with Jimmy badly injured in the middle of street fight with a group of boys. As the events of the novel grow, the reader finds Jimmy involved in several fights, particularly with Pete. Eventually, the final chapter of the novel closes with the most violent scene as Jimmy declares that Maggie is found dead, and Mary orders him to bring her body back. So whatever the forces worked against her, she did not fight. The survival of the fittest thing did not exist. So that is why the fatal end that she's come across in the form of death, and that is the end of the book as well. So we shift to the next example, as I've taken in the form of The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Now, the protagonist is a dog who is sold and abducted several times, and he kind of discovers his inner instincts. He was very comfortable in his the first owner's house, and he was living a life of you can say perfect bliss. And yeah, please excuse me for once, just a moment, please. I'm sorry. Thank you. So now, when the dog Buck, he's abducted from the first owner's house and sold to subsequent and one after the other people who were ready to buy him for different reasons. He had to carry loads and he had to pull the sledge and all that stuff. So he discovers his inner self, his inner animalistic instinct after of the fittest thing comes in here again. So as we go on, I will take that aspect as well. Now the last owner was John Thornton, and the relationship with that owner was kind of an emotional stuff, and that thing particularly brings him up into the world again. So now here I go. Now the first 4 years, now the Buck before kidnapping thing was in his perfect bliss. Now this quotation is from the beginning of the chapter 1, that's named Into the Primitive, and it defines Buck's life before he's kidnapped and dragged into the harsh world of the Klondike. As favored pet on Judge Miller's sprawling California estate, Buck lives like a king, or at least like an aristocrat or a country gentleman. As London describes him, in the civilized world, Buck is born to rule, only to be ripped from this environment and forced to fight for his survival. The story of the Call of the Wild is, in large part, the story of Buck. Buck's climb back to his top after he's fallen from grace. So actually, it's about a dog who is struggling, who is, you can say, winning over the circumstances and taking care of himself at the same time. And eventually he's a kind of a hero, the fittest to be surviving. So this is about the book. So now I'll move on to the subsequent quotes. Now the second quotation is from chapter 6, For the Love of a Man. And it depicts the tension building within Buck during the time when he was with John Thornton. Thornton is an ideal master, and his relationship with Buck represents a perfect partnership between the man and dog. London tells us that a human being when Thornton comes into his life. So the bonding between both of them is tremendous and probably inexplicable. I mean, to the extent that they were emotional towards each other. Yet at the same time, it is clear that Buck's destiny lies in the wild. So he's torn between the urges that pull him away from humanity and his intense loyalty to Thornton. So now his personality is split between the two things, that whether he should be going to a human being who would be emotional and caring and all that, or whether when after he has discovered his animalistic instinct, he should be going to the wild stuff. He is quite indecisive, but ultimately the end comes over wherein he decides to be going to the wild. Now but actually he has to go to the wild because Thornton is killed and there is nothing left to hold him. So he embraces his destiny as a wild creature. So he began from being a pet and he ends up going to the wild because of the central crisis that happens in the book of discovering his own self. That is the animalistic instinct. Now, he did not rob openly. The third quotation. Now, when we go back again to the Judge Miller's estate, Buck operated as a dainty eater and he lived under the law of love and fellowship. But the wild, he knows, he won't survive playing those rules. Now, the kind of treatment that he received at the judge's place and in Californian estate, and the kind of treatment he received by the subsequent masters who bought him for work was absolutely different and absolutely in contrast with each other. So he knew that when in wild in the situation with those stuff that he used to do, he was a very, you can say, a choosy and a very dainty eater. Now he learns to steal after that, and whatever was necessary for him to survive. So he learned all those techniques, but earlier he was given a royal treatment at the Californian estate. Now Buck's willingness to steal marks him as fit to survive in Klondike, And more importantly, such behavior reveals his adaptability, a crucial capacity under the rule of survival of the fittest. Now, he learned, that was a learned behavior that he came across, that he was surviving for his existence. Now, the next quote, he was eminently cunning and could bide his time with patience that was nothing less than primitive. Now, the days and nights Buck spent surviving the harsh, cold conditions of the frontier, working his physical body to exhaustion and enduring the brutality of his fellow dogs and owners, teach Buck a special kind of patience that London describes as primitive. So, primitive means old, something from the past. So, how did he come across, how did he, you can say, overcome the situations? Those were very difficult and harsh because of his primitiveness, because of his inherent thing that was in him, and he brought out that and he was able to survive. Now, in the first chapter of the novel, actually, it's very important because the fact is foreshadowed about Buck's biological or genetic origins in that chapter. That is, Buck was very strong dog. Saint Bernard and a half sheepdog. The breed is strong, while the sheepdogs are described to be smart. So Buck was extremely strong, while the sheepdogs are described to be smart. So he was a combination of both. So he was again equipped for the survival thing because he was intelligent, as well as, well, I don't think we can use intelligent, but he was smart. The two features combined in Buck were fundamental for him because they determined and contributed to his survival in the different occasions in the novel. For instance, when Buck is abducted, he's sold to a trader. He tries to attack the man several times, but he quickly learns the law of the club and perceives that he must not compete whosoever owns the club. There are another two major examples which clarify the significance of hereditary determinism to Buck's survival. The first one is Buck's major conflict with Spitz. However, Spitz is another dog. However, Spitz is depicted to be more powerful than Buck, yet Buck is smarter than him. Therefore, Buck wins his fight with Spitz and kills him. The second example is given in the 5th chapter of the book. While Buck in his group, he's again sold to a group of inexperienced American gold hunters. The group's miscalculation of amount of food to be taken in the journey and their lack of knowledge of the ways dealing with dogs lead to death of most members of their sledging dog group. But Buck survives and continues his journey because he was able to decide what to do and what not to do in this particular situation. Moreover, the environmental determinism has its very significance importance in shaping Buck's character. Now, naturalism also emphasizes that environment has inescapable force in shaping human character and influencing Buck's dog. So, in naturalism, the characters have no free will, extended internal forces, while environment or heredity controls their behavior. This is just determinism. All determinists believe in the existence of the will, but the will is often enslaved on the account of different reasons. The fact is perfectly portrayed in this particular book in Buck's character. In the story, Buck finds himself obliged to adopt and adjust with a new environment he lives in, otherwise wouldn't have perished. Throughout the course of the novel, the reader finds the gradual transformation in the character of Buck from a civilized, pampered, gentle, moral domestic dog to a cruel, wild, a bestial hunter and a leader of a pack of wolves. Absolutely, environment and the surrounding conditions are crucial in changing Buck's character, since the very begging Buck learned that he entered into a world that's totally different from the civilized life held in Judge Miller's vast estate in the Santa Clara Valley. He learns it is the life of the survival of the fittest from the very beginning, the laws of the club. Now, when there are more events, and so as they are described in the book with this respect, one more point that I'd like to highlight over here is the objectivity is another prominent feature which naturalist writers tend to apply in their literary works. The approach that encompasses the omniscient narration point of view is also covered in this particular book, because both Crane and London use this particular point of view in an attempt of detaching themselves from the events of the story, or to reflect the events as they are not attempt to criticize or comment on their protagonist's reaction or deeds. For instance, when Buck kills or steals food, or when Maggie turns to prostitution, both the events are only narrated in a method which never implies any criticizing tone is employed, but it's both the writers are just documenting the events. So again, the objectivity view comes in existence over here. So Jack London and Stephen Crane are objective about their description. So another one of the naturalistic quality. The next example that I'd like to take over here is An American Tragedy by Dreiser. Now, naturalism found its coherence in new theories of psychology and emerging scientific doctrines of determinism, so predominantly Darwinism and its social Spencerian varieties. Now, but the assumption of the determined world bears no particular relationship to naturalism. Indeed, the behavioral mechanics of naturalism tend to marginalize the political, the cultural, and the historical issues that informs most debates about national identity. Now, I just come on to the critical part of it. So now, when we are talking about the protagonist, Clyde Griffiths is a protagonist. The society that's presented in An American Tragedy is relentlessly materialistic determinism types. The only quality that are admired are material wealth, prosperity, and social status, as measured by power and possessions. Obviously, the pursuits that enjoyment of wealth is everything. Its wealth is everything in the book, probably. No, most certainly, sorry. This is the society into which Clyde Griffith is born, since he rejects him is acquisition of money and the social status he thinks this will bring him. But he is very weak and restless. He cannot change his fate because it has predetermined, because it is predetermined before. We'll come to this in the due course of time. Clyde is like an animal in a jungle that's struggling and surviving in a cruel, harsh society. He cannot control his nature and depends on conditions around him. In the end, he's wiped out by social punishment and his instinctive pleasures. Clyde's parents were too busy to teach their children an attitude towards life. We can see that Clyde, a young, poorly educated boy who has no moral guidance towards life, existing here, and he is kind of dreaming his ways to pleasure. He was very lonely, ignorant, and expressed his life as cheap, responsible to his shabby religious parents. Now, the entire story runs around Clyde Griffith, and he was a gentleman. In the beginning of the book, he's a boy of 16, a gentleman of the jury, the individual who is trial. Now, the first statement is the statement of the jury, who is speaking about Clyde Griffith. The gentleman of the jury is speaking. The individual who's on trial for his life is a mental as well as a moral coward. No more, no less, not a downright, a hard-hearted statement by you can say, this is Clyde's lawyer, Belknap's opening statement during the trial. Now the trial is being conducted on Clyde Griffith. His case is based around the admission that Clyde is guilty. By painting Clyde as a penitent, immoral person, Belknap is trying to lessen any lead to his client's vilification. He is trying to appear forthright and thus engender trust is built built by the jury in his case. So now when there is a trial against Clyde, because he had been fighting with his friends, and that is why there's a trial, and there is a kind of, you can say an understatement by the jury, which is going against the naturalistic feature that Clyde carries. That is, he is his moral values don't exist. So the reader is compelled to think about, or think twice about what kind of person Clyde is, because his lawyer is putting forward these kind of sentences. So what are the moral values that exist in Clyde's personality? Clyde says, Clyde, if I could only die, the third one. Now there are certain incidents in the book when Clyde marries Roberta, and and there are trials, and there are you can say that the graph goes up and down. The graph is constantly you can say dancing. So when Mason reads this letter from Roberta to Clyde during Clyde's trial, this dramatic delivery coupled with Roberta's emotional world produces dramatic effect in the courtroom. Unfortunately for Roberta, her wish was granted. With a cruel irony, she seals her fate with that letter, because the man she wrote to begging for death actually killed her. So both the pathetic individual and the tragic civilization loom in this novel. So the individual, okay, the individual has shortcomings. He has got drawbacks. As in Shakespeare, we have that tragic flaw. So the individual has a tragic flaw, yet the surroundings, the society, the situations work upon him all the more. So he becomes more fragile to the situations, and that is why his response is absolutely fatal in the end. So that is why the pathetic individual and the tragic civilization is working simultaneously on the subject, that is the hero. In Kansas, when we see the Griffiths in the society whose organic community was declined, the original community wasn't there. Now Clyde's class snobbery is an outgrowth of individualism and urbanization. Now he was something in the very early years of life, but he became something else. And we see the decline of belief in Clyde, the growth of secular ethic, and the fragmentation of his personality. So when Clyde is being talked about, we see that he's a crumpled person, he's a crumpled personality. And research fictional cosmos asked between the weak, the poor, and the ugly, between the relatively strong, rich, and the beautiful. So two situations. One has the weak, the poor, and the ugly, and the other one has strong, rich, and beautiful things. So it's a, you can say, a fight between both the situations. So as in a naturalistic book, you can say the tragedy occurs on you can say the main character. Now there is an uneasy mixture. There is an, you can say, imbalanced mixture of the scientific notions as well as the compassionate feelings. So both exist, but they are in constant fight with each other. Now, Clyde Griffith, he experiences a tragic death in the ending, because the powerful force are working against him and he cannot cope up with them. The internal forces such as fear and sexual desires, they dominate him, and they are actually a big enemy in the end. They prove to be a big enemy. He cannot resist the temptation of these forces. External forces such as milieu, poverty, and social power are the most important forces that lead him to death. So this is again one of the characters who could not cope up with the surroundings, cope up with the situations, and cope up with the forces that worked upon him. So here I switch upon the next book that I've taken as an example. It's McTeague by Frank Norris. Now here in this particular mm, book, the tragic flaw, or you can say the patheticness of the character McTeague, is the greed, is the greed, or the desire for money. And he's a dentist. He's working at a dental shop, and he's married to Trina. When get Trina to his clinic to get that some dental work done, but he falls in love with Trina and eventually gets married to him. Trina gets a lottery of some $5,000, and then she changes the particular the nature of Trina changes just after she gets the money. Now the world of, you can say, chance victimizes them. The wrestling match between McTeague and Marcus was the turning point. Now this is one of the situations that they have come across, and the two disintegrate. They turn miserly and selfish after Trina won a lottery, and the contemporary society was driven by the desire of money. As I spoke to you about the Dresser's book as well, the society is driven by the luxuries, the desire for luxuries, the all that money brings in, all that money can buy. The society was driven by the particular materialistic aspect. Now here Darwinism is dominant. Now McTeague, from a gentleman, turns to a beast in the end. He is governed by animal forces. His decadence has a cause, and there are animalistic forces within him. Now he hits Trina under the influence of alcohol, and he becomes, you can say, a victim to his own desires in the end. And when he kills Marcus, he's handcuffed to him, and eventually he's just dead, handcuffed to a already dead or already dead person, because he cannot release himself. So finally the death comes. You can say there's a reference to death, but actually he doesn't die in the book. Now these are the couple of aspects of naturalism, wherein the couple has become greedy, violence, the negativism, the pessimism, again, that which I spoke about, that the glass is half empty. Now all these aspects dominate the book tremendously, and it is this book is a kind of it created a history in those times when naturalism was concerned. So now since we are out of all the examples related to naturalism, we will discuss about some diversions or digressions that have come over in context of naturalism. One thing which came across me was naturalistic feminism when I was going through my research. So while thinking about the character of Maggie, it's kind of it's more than naturalism. Probably the central character is a woman. Historically, women at this time, especially those burdened with foreign heritage, were given little or no choice in their lives. So was Maggie having choices? Now this is all about feminism. When we speak about making choices and having choices, the very element of free will, moral or otherwise, it didn't exist for them. Now, regardless of their social class, therefore Maggie extends to become an examination of the often brutal, always impersonal forces of nature, primarily biology, poverty, moral hypocrisy, and upon the lives of urban women in industrial America. Now, biology, the nature of gender and of sex, is one of the most harsh elements affecting the lives of the tenement women. For example, Mary Johnson, Mag and Jimmy, hot-tempered mother, is put forth an Amazonian huge of physical form and great in strength. This, of course, ensures when at the same time Maggie is a timid character, you can say a weak character, her mother is projected as her mother, Mary Johnson, is projected as a character who is empowered or who can survive the big bad world. So there is a contrast in the book itself from the feministic point of view that these two women stand in opposition to each other. Her massive shoulders frequently heaved in anger, while she shook her children until they literally rattled. Her survival, as said on the page number 7 of the book, um, of the text, Maggie, her survival is also secured by her ability to take on those traits reserved primarily for men. Now, when she goes out to the world and she works as a prostitute, isn't that particular aspect of earning money in those days, it was reserved to men because women didn't go out to work. And actually, we're talking about the empowerment of women. They were to be kept at home in those days. So according to the societal norms which worked upon the character of Maggie, wasn't she going against the societal norms? So when we talk about the societal norms or the character going against the societal norm, or she being made to go against the societal norms, isn't that again an exploitation in the shape that, okay, we as women, we are now empowered enough to be going out and working and all that stuff. But if we knew that we have to behave in this particular fashion, we have to go by these rules and regulations. If we knew, and history was an example that all the women would behave in the same fashion, the drift from the mainstream thought becomes a torture. The embedded in the social psychological system is more over a jolt to that character or a person or a subject. So to be drifting away from that psychological system is more over a jolt to that character or a person or a subject. So isn't the oppression of Maggie, which comes her way, is about the existing patriarchal norms or the knowledge of those norms as they were going out for centuries, adrift from those particular, that fashion, that method, that formula which was working upon the society, that women did not work. For Maggie, working becomes a very big issue because women did not have work other than prostitution. So that drift from the mainstream patriarchal thought itself becomes a torture to her in the shape that she has to work, to be finding no appropriate work for herself eventually, except for prostitution. So the entire scenario is about that oppression that exists because of the patriarchy. Now, when we talk about the future of, as Dresser said in Sister Carrie, he comments upon the women who adopt a cosmopolitan life as Maggie did. Even Maggie went out to work. So, commenting upon the future of such young women as Carrie, Dresser writes, I quote, when a girl leaves home at 18, she does one of two things. Either she falls into saving hands or becomes better, or she rapidly assumes the cosmopolitan standard of virtue and becomes worse. Of an intermediate balance, under the circumstances, there is no possibility. So there is no possibility of a woman in those days going out and working. If she falls into good hands, she is fine, her life is made. But if she falls into bad hands, there is no end to it. Now, the certainty which is underscored here is that young women who assume cosmopolitan ways will naturally fare worse than those who fall into the hands. But for Carrie, the opposite happens. And this irony is at the root of Carrie's successful city adventure. In order to succeed, Carrie decides she must learn the cosmopolitan way of survival, a way which will depend on how willing she is to become sexually involved with men. But Carrie does not become controlled by sexual passion. That Carrie even possesses a sexual drive is uncertain in the book. Her reaction to men, as exemplified by her first experience with Charles Trout, is neutral one. Now, the way Sister Carrie behaves, the way the character of Carrie behaves, is absolutely different from what she is expected to. As in Mary's context, we kind of predict that a girl coming from slums, and if she's beautiful, most likely she'll become a prostitute eventually. But Carrie behaves, she resists to the circumstances, but eventually she also becomes a prostitute, but she resists. So there are no instances where they show that Carrie is an immoral woman, though Dresser has commented a lot upon the women going cosmopolitan. Now, one more aspect that I'd like to discuss when it came across my eyes while researching about this particular topic. Anne Petrie, Richard Wright, and Nella Larson it's related to the African American literature. So gradually, when American literature was blooming with naturalistic African American literature was also flowing. So these three writers, Anne Petrie, Richard Wright, and Ella Larson, they were the major followers of naturalism. And actually, naturalism was discovered by W.E.B. Du Bois and Paul Dunbar in 1890s. So Du Bois being the you can say pioneer of African American naturalists, and Richard Wright's The Native Son. It speaks about how divided the society, or how does a society create a criminal out of an innocent person, so a young man. And again, the societal, you can say, pressure, or you can say the surroundings transforming a person into a criminal. And Nella Larson reveals the state of alienation on the basis of the color of skin. Herein, I'd like to elaborate something about Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place. Now, Naylor's novels are often linked to 1940s tradition of Anne Petrie and Richard Wright, largely because of their focus on the urban decay, the limited economic opportunities available for African Americans, and a racist economic system which governs one's destiny. So the race, the color of the skin, that's the race, they're being black, the societal situations wherein they were not accepted as normal citizens except for slaves. So everything worked upon the character in Toni Morrison's Beloved, The Bluest Eye as well, Alice Walker's Color Purple, Gloria Naylor, The Women of Brewster Place, as I'm elaborating about. So now this focus is particularly on the women of Brewster Place. Critics such as Henry Louis Gates Jr., Michael F. Lynch, James Robert Saunders, and Hillary naturalism of Petrie and Anne Petrie and Richard Wright. So now you can conclude from probably this explanation that these critics found out that this was a segment of writers, as in Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Gloria Naylor, and they were worked upon by the ideas of Anne Petrie and Richard Wright and Nella Larson. So the naturalist joined hand in hand with the feminist culture as well, and herein there are some naturalist paintings, and in art also this particular tradition developed because the art expressed death, or you can say whatever was there, whatever existing in the truest of forms, and the people started appreciating this aspect of art as well. Now let's come to a conclusion. So to sum up, these were even Gandhian philosophy asserts naturalism. Even Gandhian philosophy speaks about naturalism, and whatever is real is being appreciated. Whatever is real is being talked about. So no intervention of any kind of spiritualism, supernatural happenings, God, or anything. So the thing was presented as it is, and the brute within is talked about. Now, who was that brute within? That inherent animalistic instinct was being talked about and projected in the text. So, and these were some of the important texts that I had mentioned already. And herein, I'd like to thank you all for your patient
Thank you, ma'am.
listening.
Thank you so much for a very detailed explanation of this very important topic of naturalism, which plays a very significant part in the history of American literature. Your presentation has been very lucid and as well as explanatory, which was expected from you. So thank you so much for putting in the effort on behalf of our participants. I would now request our participants to kindly put forward your questions in the chat box. The chat box is open. Our participants are very happy about your presentation. You can see the messages in the chat box. And thank you on behalf of Team DAATH Voyage. We will just wait for some time. Yeah, we are getting in some questions. Ma'am, what we are doing is, if we'll be taking few questions, and after that, I'll be mailing you the question set of this session. And we are planning to take your answers by 31st of May, and we are planning to include it with the book chapter. So some questions will be very insightful and very critical. So that might help students when the book is released. So from that perspective, we will, ask you to kindly take the pen and answer those questions at your own free time. I'll just unmute you. Yes. The first question that I have got here is, Catherine Spanskaren notes that naturalism is usually traced to the works of Balzac in the 1840s.
Yes, most certainly.
Because opinion?
Yeah, because it started as a French movement. Émile Zola started this movement in France. So that is why Catherine Specker notes that this is usually traced to the French tradition, and that is why this movement, Romanticism dominated in Europe first, and then that is why the naturalism came as a response to that Romanticism first, before America. So that is why this is right, absolutely. And since it came as a response towards resistance to Romanticism, that is why it was brought up in France, and that is why these particular critics have been commenting about it. And I hope this satisfies you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would request the participants, please, I know you all are very happy with the presentation and you are congratulating, ma'am, that's fine. We are also very happy. Kindly put forward your questions. We are waiting for your critical questions. If you don't mind, kindly a question. The question, as I said, we have a heterogeneous group, so we have all sorts of questions. How to distinguish between realism and naturalism? Of course, the age-old question. And how does American naturalism differs from the naturalism of England?
Actually, there's not much of a difference between naturalism and the English naturalism, for the reason that though the reasons were different, the English naturalism came as a response to the decline of the Victorian morality, and the American naturalism came because of the, you can say, the decline of, sorry, the destroying of that American dream thing, the agrarian myth and all that. There is not much of a difference between the naturalism that's American and that naturalism that's European. But the reasons for the advent of naturalism in both the areas were different, and that's about it. So just the reasons matter herein in this particular context, but there is actually no difference between American naturalism and European naturalism. Just the reasons of the advent were different.
And
So
ma'am,
it's not like a European naturalism existing in this particular text.
and ma'am, what is the basic difference between realism and naturalism?
Yes, I think I have discussed it already in my presentation, that realism is, you can say, if I am delivering this lecture, so you can see me in person, I'm talking to you, and the entire environment, the say we have some network glitches and all that. So that is absolutely the naturalistic way of presenting it. Okay, that's, there are technical glitches and we are explaining and we are talking to each other over any element that is, you can say, that depends on the free will of the person. Say for instance, I say that this happened because of something. This is happening because of a reason. That's the realism aspect. But naturalistic aspect is that this is the screen, this is the way we are presenting, and it is as it is. As realism is because of something, because of some happening, and there is free will in realism, but there is no free will in naturalism. It is absolutely without any interference, the clarity of the situation, the picture as it is, straightforward. So there is no, actually, there's a very thin line between realism and naturalism, absolutely a thin line. So with certain aspects, like when we talk about determinism, or when we talk about life being as it is, there is naturalism. But otherwise, when we talk about person has a free will, it's realism.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, how was naturalism reflected in other genres of American literature?
Oh, it's a very you can say, I can say so many genres are coming into it. Like I spoke about one, like in feminism, and there are lot many, you can say, intermingling of genres in this particular aspect. Because when we talk about nature, when we talk about um, anything that's very, you can say, nascent, very in its a crude form, we can talk about, leaving aside the perception part. We are not talking about the perception thing. We're not talking about anything that is intervening through the mental thought process in its nascent form. So many genres will be affecting this particular, you can say, um, so many, I think, novels, prose, and so many short stories. Even there was one short story that came across me, Jack London's, uh, I'm just missing out the name, I'm sorry. There was this short story, and it was about a person who is, you can say, lost in the snow, and he has a dog, and sometimes he thinks about that dog, that I should kill this dog and get some warmth out of his skin and all that. So he has to burn fire, but he is so cold that he cannot absolutely do anything about it. And then what happens is that he tries to survive by sleeping, and he thinks for once that this kind of death will be absolutely welcome thing, because actually he's missed his team, and he's going to his team to be kind of rescued by them, but he's unable to do so. So the entire the character of that person, the accompany the company of the dog, and the thought processes of this person are very crude. And you can say anybody on earth in that situation would have all those thoughts. So it's like life would be presented as it is, and no thought processes involved. So short stories, novels, prose, all the genres are, you can say, covered in American literature. I mean, under naturalism, and intervention of many other isms as well.
Thank you, ma'am. The
Yeah.
next question is somehow related to this. Do you
Oh,
think that naturalism still holds in postmodern American literature?
oh yes, why not? Because when there is narrative detachment, where the narrator doesn't speak, whether the narrator doesn't comment about the characters. So that is why there are lot many texts in postmodern. I'm sorry, I won't be able to name a few right now. It doesn't click me, but still there are, because the narrative detachment thing dominates in a lot many contexts in postmodern literature.
Thank you, ma'am. We take the last two questions. Is eco-criticism any way related to naturalism?
Oh yes, why not? Because in eco-criticism, we learn about the ecological system, the nature as it is. I mean, I think to a point, because when we talk about eco-criticism, it is perception related. The perception intervenes. But in naturalism, the perception doesn't intervene. It is as it is. It is what we are just reading in the text. So when talking about eco-criticism, there have been instances when the books are eco-critic, the books by eco-critics, and they have involved feminism and naturalism as well, but partially, not fully, because it comes with a perception as well. Now, even in the next question, I'll try to relate. Can I please take the next question along with this?
Which one, ma'am?
Are there any fundamental differences between rationalism and naturalism?
Yeah, you can take, because we have one
Okay.
more important question. Yeah.
Yeah. So now when we're talking about rationalism or eco-criticism, they come up with a perception. When we talk about rational thinking, it is a perception, it is a thought process, it is a judgmental way of putting forward certain points. But naturalism is absolutely nascent. You do not have a rationalism involved, or you do not have a into it. So it is absolutely crude in their own manner. So rationalism or eco-criticism, rationalism in any way doesn't touch upon the naturalism thing, but eco-criticism touches it partially because it comes with a perception.
Ma'am, the last question we take, many of the things that were essential to naturalism in the 1600s were overturned by Newton. And many of the things that were essential to naturalism in the 1800s were overturned by quantum physics. Now, if naturalism is such a fuzzy concept as to be continually overturned by new physics, why is it important?
Yeah, actually, whatever we you can say learn in naturalism, it is scientifically proven. So as in the new inventions takes place, I don't think that the idea of Newton was overturned, though the aspects were always scientifically proven in naturalism. So and in quantum mechanics, as and when the new things come over, as and when the new things get invented or discovered, obviously the older things would be obsolete. These days we are using those LED bulbs, right, in place of those electric bulbs, that yellow color ka bulb which we used to use way long back. So as and when the new things come over, the the earlier things, the past, though the basic concept remains the same, it's not absolutely overturned. You cannot say it is overturned. It's just an addition to that particular aspect. So even in naturalism, we are trying to discover more and more. But since a part of it is valid, again we are taking a chunk out of it. Again we are